Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and I'm back with another video that I don't want to be recording. I was just a few days ago, I was doing tribute to the late, great Neil Adams, and then we just learned a couple days later that unfortunately the great George Perez has passed away. So I just want to talk a little bit about George Perez. This is going to be a pretty short video. I don't have actually. It's odd. I don't have as many like big key books from George Perez, but I have a lot more books that I enjoy reading from George Perez than Neil Adams. I've mentioned a number of times on my channel before that when it comes to classic superhero books, Avengers has always been my favorite. I have a complete run of Avengers, and so as a huge Avengers fan, obviously there's really hardly anybody in the history of Avengers that looms as big as George Perez because his art just sort of defined the Bronze Age for the Avengers. Um, and then he came back to the series in the late 90s when it was at its like one of its all-time low points and helped revive it, bring it back to be the number one book in comics again. And so he's gonna, of course, hold a special place in my heart. The other thing is, besides his great artwork, he was just like the coolest guy. So if you ever had a chance to meet George Perez, you know that he's just the nicest guy. He was always smiling and bubbly and energetic, and he loved spending time with the fans. He would do uh, not only would he sign your comics for free, he would give you free sketches at conventions. I didn't get a sketch from him, but I do have a couple books that I have signed. You may remember that I had given away one as part of the 500 subscriber giveaway. But of course, I have more that are not going anywhere, um, and I'll show those here. It's one of the greatest Avengers stories of all time. It's Avengers 161 and 162, and you can see the signature up here at the top. And then on this one, he signed it here. Just one of the greatest Avengers stories, but also one of the greatest Avengers runs. This run here, he started with Avengers with issue 141, which I also have signed, although not by him. I'll tell that story in a minute. But then really when Jim Shooter took over as a writer, starting and then Perez sort of was the regular artist, and their run from I would say starting with a Graviton story, 158, really just fantastic, up through the end of the Korvac saga, which neither of them actually finished, but the stuff here in the 160s just top notch. And this is just an all-time classic. The story that I have with these is that I was on vacation going to Disney World in 1998, and there was a comic book convention in Orlando. And I'm so glad that I went to that convention because I met a whole bunch of creators that I've never seen at any other shows, and a lot of them are no longer with us. So Dick Giordano and Gil Kane, I got signed at that show. I also got signatures from like Bob Layton and several other people. But the big one for me was George Perez. I don't have it. I don't know where I put it, but somewhere there's a photo of me with George Perez, and I was just so excited to meet him. But I didn't have any of my comics with me because I was on vacation. I didn't bring any comics. So I ran around the convention and I bought a few comics to get signed. And so that's how I ended up with two copies of these, the signed copies, and then the previous copies that I no longer have those. I got rid of them. But I bought these, and I bought another copy of Avengers #1, which had just which was that year, 98. I got him to sign that Avengers #1 when he came back to the book after that Heroes Reborn nonsense and the Heroes Return, where Kurt Busiek was writing and George Perez was drawing. It was so great to have the classic team back and the classic feel of the Avengers back. and some really good stories, some great stories that the two of them put together. Really great Ultron story that they did, and then JLA Avengers crossover, which is really like the last book that they worked on together in that run. Absolutely fantastic. But George was wearing his signature Hawaiian shirt, and he was so nice, and so I got his signature on these books, and I did have a chance to see him at some other shows. But towards the end, the last few years, he's just so popular and he's so giving of his time that it was very hard to actually see him, because basically you would have to get there right at the beginning of the day, and they would give you the tickets to like the first 150 people who got to his table, and then he would basically block out the rest of the day to sign for those people and draw for those people. And if you didn't have one of those, there was just too many people that were trying to get his time, so he couldn't see everyone. But he didn't want to charge for it. Some other creators in that situation would charge for it, both to make some money, but also to winnow out the crowd, right? Because some people aren't going to pay 10 or 15 or 30 or $50, so you can get the crowd smaller. But he didn't want to do that. He wanted to keep everything free. So at those conventions, I basically decided I already had a signature. I didn't want to take a slot away from someone that had never met George, because he's such a great guy. So even though I saw him, sitting over there at his table, I didn't actually have a chance to interact with him other than that time in Orlando, because I just didn't want to take any of his time and take it away from the other people. I also just want to mention, of course, have to mention Wonder Woman. Seminal classic run where he reimagined the character, modernized the character. Great run in terms of the mythology. For me, the first part of the run where he's drawing is the best part of the run, and it's not just because his art's so good, but I didn't feel in some of the later issues like the artists were quite capturing as well as he could the spirit of his writing. But obviously he's known as the artist, but his writing on Wonder Woman is excellent, particularly for me, like the first 15 issues, which deals with the origin of Wonder Woman and then the backstory, and you learn about Steve Trevor and Hippolyta and the story of Hercules, and it's really one whole thing. And there's some amazing covers I think people don't give enough credit for. One of my all-time favorites here is Wonder Woman number 10. It's not the first appearance of the armor for Diana. The first time that I think she ever appeared in the armor was actually during the Mike Sekowsky run, way back in the late 60s, but it was very rare. He really put a signature on it. It looks so cool. And after this, this story, you'd really see the armor a lot more. This is as you can see, it's a newsstand version. There's also a direct edition of this issue that has a wraparound cover, so it's a full cover. I don't have that version. I just have this one. But I also love, at the end of the story, there's this great sort of epilogue to it here in issue 14, and I love this cover. It's just so joyful, and the detail and the colors. Just absolutely love both of these covers, and so obviously he's just one of the best to ever do it. So it's a sad day. Back in the 90s when I first got into internet fandom, when the internet first came into existence, I was part of the Avengers mailing list, which went through a few different iterations, and at one point George joined. And he was so generous with his time that he ended up having to quit the group because he was spending too much time talking to us about old Avengers stories. But he was always just the best. So anyway, just a few words about George Perez, one of the greatest. And it's a tough time for us classic comic collectors. It's a tough time. So but we still have the comics. We'll always have the comics. So that's it. Tell me about your George Perez thoughts and memories below, and I'll see you next time.